All right. Okay. We will be starting right on time. All right. Okay. Very, very good afternoon to everyone present here. It's a great privilege, it's a great honor, and I'm absolutely delighted here to have with us Dr. Madhur Mangalam, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Biomechanics at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, with a very, very strong academic background. And I think it's very heartening for our students here in Fergusson College, Pune, to know that he has studied and lived in Pune for 5 years in ISER when he was completing his education. Dr. Madhur's research focuses on understanding the complex relationship between human movement, cognition, and neuroscience. They can't hear? Switch on the audio there then. Sorry for that. Dr. Madhur is a passionate teacher and teaches a broad range of topics which are interdisciplinary in nature, including perception, action, mechanics, which is very, very close to something that we are studying in cognitive psychology. The industry readiness cell of the Department of Psychology is hosting this session. I now hand over the session and introduction of our guest speaker for today to the industry readiness cell.
You're muted.
A very good morning to everyone and welcome back to the Career Guidance series by the Industry Readiness Cell. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Madhur Mangalam, a distinguished expert in the field of biomechanics. Dr. Mangalam is a passionate professor of biomechanics at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, specializing in cutting edge multi scale statistical modeling methods for understanding human action and perception capabilities and developing digital biomarkers of health and disease states affecting these capabilities. His work has garnered recognition for his significant contributors to the field, positioning him as a thought leader and innovator. Dr. Mangalam has thorough understanding of the intricate patterns of physiological fluctuations associated with complex behaviors and functions. His research has been featured in esteemed academic journals, including Current Biology, Journal of the Royal Society Interface, and Physical Review Research. As we look forward to gaining valuable insights from Sir, let's welcome Dr. Madhur Mangalam.
Well, it's my honor to be with you all. So thanks a lot for inviting me. And hopefully, we both will gain something from this interaction.
Once again, sir, thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear us first.
Yeah, I can. I can hear you.
To start off, we would like to first ask you what sparked your initial interest in understanding human behavior and how did that eventually lead to your specialization in biomechanics?
Okay, so that's a long story and that's a very windy path. So I was never interested in behavior to begin with. I was a trouble kid at ISER Pune. I wanted to be an engineer, so I prepared for IIT JEE. My rank was pretty, at the back. So I finally got a call that I'm, eligible for IISER Pune. IISER Pune was an institute who were launched in 2006, right? They were basically science equivalents of technology institute, which were IITs. At that moment, I didn't know the difference between science and technology. So I came to IISER Pune for my counseling, and I asked the teacher, there was one professor that, what if I need like a giant machine to, study animals like cows, for instance. And they said, yeah, we'll pay you and we'll get you the machines and we'll get you all the facilities you need. So, well, and I was an engineer building things, so I thought that would be the best place to be. That used to run in NCL campus, and NCL and that whole Pashan area used to be really beautiful at that time, all the forests around in Panchvati and things like that. And I was always interested in wildlife and forests. So I came and joined the institute. It turned out to be that I started disliking a lot of things about myself, about, adolescence problems. And I was a troubled kid, following instructions. And one summer I was really troubled and I was thought I'll sit in the library. And I was a backbencher at ISER, okay? So I was like third from the last in terms of my grades. So I was reading some books, randomly. And I decided, I was obsessive. So I decided to read the whole shelf, one of the shelves. So I started reading one book by the other, and the one of the books was The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, and a couple of other books. So then I started reading the references at the back. Started reading Ernst Mayr, for instance, Evolution, books on evolution by Ernst Mayr. And that sparked my interest in biology. Till that time, I was more interested in physics, as well as the biology faculty at IISER Pune was so much more interesting than other faculties. Also, I had a crush on a girl at that time, and she took biology. So I thought maybe I'll just sit in the class and watch her. If not, study. So all the, excuses got together, and I suddenly changed my subject to biology in my third year at IISER Pune, which was a surprise to everyone who knew me at that moment. I used to almost flunk in biology till my high school. So, and yeah, so then I started watching a movie called Into the Wild. Okay, I watched it a lot of times, and I wanted to live in a forest like the protagonist in that movie. So I contacted Professor Meva Singh, who is in Mysore, who was told. So Dr. Sutit De at IISER Pune, he told me that probably the kind of troubled kid I was, Professor Meva Singh is the only person in India he knows who can tolerate me. So I applied to him, and I said that I want to live in forest. Do you have some work in forest? He used to work on monkeys, so I went there, and that was like a life-changing event. Then I came back, I started working on behavior with dogs and other stuff. Then I wanted to be on National Geographic. So there was a project in Brazil on capuchin monkeys, and I contacted a professor in US, Professor Dorothy Fagesi. She took me for a PhD program after 2 years of working in Mysore on monkeys. And then I worked on monkeys during that time. But at the same time, I was roaming around in different departments there. So my friends were in biomechanics. So I used to hang out with them. So I learned all the skills in biomechanics, and then I got more interested in that. So it's not like a one movement, right? But a lot of things, a lot of events that happen. I was just interested in knowing more and doing more. And it turns up that I finally ended up in behavioral neuroscience. But I had physics background, so I came back to more coding and more maths and more physics now. So now I study behavior. My PhD is in psychology, by the way. Now I study behavior, but I use physics to study behavior rather than studying behavior, in terms of descriptions. So it's not been a one event. It's not been a one moment. It's been a lot of, things which basically shape the trajectory.
I think that's very wonderful that you share that, because all of us think of a one point trajectory that you start from bachelor's, then you move to master's, then you move to PhD, and you have a very linear thought which sort of helps you decide your career progression. I love that you shared that there are so many factors, right from a girl to your interest in monkeys or your emotional disposition that led you to where you are today. Love
There were movement in my undergraduate in my a year and a half in the undergraduate. I was almost for sure that I would become a laser physicist. Okay, I would be doing laser optics. I was dead sure. Okay. Then I was also dead sure to be an evolutionary biologist at some point, and also an ethologist at some point. Okay, and also a neuroscientist at some point. So, and I still don't vouch that I'll be doing next 5 years what I'm doing right now. So. So yeah,
I think your interests somehow show in the choice of the resource people that you choose for your podcast, because the people that you've spoken about, you've interviewed, resource people from all these backgrounds at some point in your podcast.
right.
So yeah. Yes, Indira, you may continue.
It's really fascinating to hear about your journey and how you covered all of these different disciplines, going from one to the other. And, we were also, and one thing that we found very interesting was you talked about AI recently, especially about AI in education. So we would like to know about how you think AI would affect fields like psychology, because we like to believe that they're very human fields, so they would be hard to replace. But since you're
Mhm.
in the field very actively, what do you think?
Okay, so I might be take it with a pinch of salt. I might be wrong with it, okay, because everyone has an opinion on AI right now, and nobody knows where it's actually going and what would happen. So I have a podcast session, my last one with Professor James Hudson, and he mentioned three things. So if basically the governments don't stop it, there's no problem with the money, okay, and nobody basically destroys AI capacity, through violence. If none of these things happen, then there's no stopping of AI, okay, the way it is progressing. I use AI very heavily for my own research, for learning, for doing a lot of things, okay. Our university has subscriptions for all the professors. And universities that's my feeling, are alarmed. Education is in generally institutions are alarmed because AI can. So when you said that it will be very difficult to replace humans, okay, or some work which humans do. We think that, right? We thought that a machine cannot write like us, but now the machine is actually writing like us, and the machine is writing better than 95% of us, right? At some point, we thought that machine will not be able to, for instance, make things. But now we have 3D printers, right, which can make things much more precisely than any human can make at that scale. And we already use machines for different things. For instance, we use microscopes, that's a machine, right? We use a lens I mean, we magnify our eyes. So we have been using things to do things which humans cannot do or can do to a certain extent. AI is just another technology like that. What is different is that we thought our idea of machines was basically they will do the hard work, right? And we accepted the fact that machine will automate things and there'll be robots and in companies, like how many engineers do we need or mechanics to make cars now? So if you go to a factory where cars are made, right, we make millions and millions of cars every year. That's not because a lot of humans are working there. A lot of it's basically robots. So we agreed that that will happen. What we did not agree with that AI can actually write, it can create forms, it can do research, those kind of things we never thought it can do. And that is what it is doing now. So the question is that what do you now learn, right? As a student, what do you learn? If you learn something for 4 years, which a skill, for instance, a writing skill, which AI can do, then the question is that is it worth learning? One can argue that it is or it is not. The second thing is that are you needed in the job market, right? What exactly are you needed for in the job market? So, first of all, there will be a lot of disparity in terms of different countries and different demographies, different countries will adapt AI to different extents. Our systems are different, languages are different. But at the end of the day, a lot of things which we think will disappear. Now, specific to psychology, for instance, what is our typical psychology undergraduate do, right? Psychology is one of the most popular degrees, right? Even like where I am right now, most universities in the US, almost the biggest department is psychology for undergraduate degrees, right? So we have thousands of psychology undergraduates. Uh, One of the major fields in which they go is therapy, right? But other than that, they were into management. They used to get a degree in like certain other field and they will venture out, right? It was a very basic entry to undergraduate degree. Now the question is that when I'm writing with, okay, when you are texting, like how many of you actually talk to your friends now on phone, right? We text more now than we used when we talk, right? If you go 15 years back, people used to not like texting. People used to call, right? And now if you have to call someone, you first write a message, right? Can I call you? Which is weird, right? Most of the times when there's a call by a person unknown, we generally have a hesitancy in society right now to pick up those calls, right? Now, when you are talking with someone on the chat, you don't know the face, you don't know the person, right? What they're doing right now. Then whether that person is responding or the AI is responding, do you know right now? You probably don't know, right? And there are apps which can manage, your messages for you. So if AI become that better that it can actually respond to the messages, understanding what you're doing and your past interactions, and the person doesn't know that it is you, that means it has replaced you when it comes to interaction with that person, right? So if you think about with the therapist, we right now a lot of therapy is already online, right? There are people making a lot of money making, doing therapy online, especially in the US, for instance. Now, if there are so good AI models that they actually create a caricature of a person who looks like human and moves like human, because you're never going to meet that person in real life with flesh and bones and touch them, but it looks really real, and you can animate them and they can interact with you, and you will never figure out that you're not talking to a person. That means you have replaced that person, when it comes to therapy, right? So the good thing is that a lot more people can get therapy who need it, for instance. But the bad part is that a lot less therapists are needed, right? But the rate at which technology is progressing, that's a finite possibility. So I don't know what would happen, but at the same time, a lot of those things will change and will go into that direction. So I think on a safer side right now, if I were an undergraduate right now, I would definitely try to differentiate myself, or I try to be a generalist. I would try to know a lot more things in the world. I want to know a lot more skills in the world, because if you're specialized in certain things, it's very easy to automate it, right? But if you are a combination of a lot of things, so for instance, look at fast food. The easier it is, if you want to make an omelet, machines can make the omelet very easily, right? But if you want to make a very elaborate recipe, machines cannot make it. So if I were an undergraduate student right now and I was preparing for my future, I would like to know as many things I can know. I would like to have as many skills as I can have, because it will be very hard to replace me, or I will have some edge. I think that's the only thing I can speak to that point, because we don't know what is coming. We don't know how fast the development would be, but the development would be very, very fast. That's for sure. If that satisfies the question.
Yeah. So definitely that tells us, how prominent AI is getting in fields that we never expected, and that sooner or later you may find yourself using AI. And in that very podcast, you had also mentioned something called about cognitive dissonance in the usage of AI. So could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so you all know about cognitive dissonance, right? As students of psychology. So basically we deny a fact, right? By actively creating stories or denying, the possibilities, even though we know that it's true. We create a dissonance from the reality in our head. So so what happens is that it's very hard to accept that something which is artificial can replace us or can do things which we do, right? We take a lot of pride in what we do, and suddenly if something else can do it, it kind of shatters our thought. So when people confront, how good AI has become at certain things, uh, for instance, a lot of programming, it's shocking, or okay, to know that initially, and you don't want to accept that reality. You always want to deny that, yeah, but there's something about the humans. Yeah, but this is something which I can do, or humans will do, which AI will never replace. Now, it may be, or it should be, but at the same time, we don't know how the technology will progress, right? So it's a good idea to not to be in that cognitive dissonance state, but actually be more realistic about the possibility, right? Uh, and accept that. Uh, so, uh, so yeah, so that's basically the cognitive dissonance. And one of the, talking back to the previous question, is also because we will need a lot more humans for human interactions, right, in the future. Like for instance, nursing. Like we have an aging population. The whole world is aging, right? We will need a lot more nurses. We will need a lot more daycare. We will not need a lot more. We will need a lot more human touch in real life, right? So I think that's where uh, uh, one should put their eggs on, because we will either you're hyper specialized, like hyper specialized in certain things, very very technical, that even technology cannot, uh, but if you're average in something, it's not a good idea. Then you focus on actually human interactions, something which includes humans, and you think will not replace, okay, human interactions, because people will be craving for human interactions, right, at some point.
Keeping in line of the topic of your podcast, another one that you had done was, I think it was Rhythms of the Mind, that spoke about music and its effect on our mind and how and our mental health.
Yeah.
And since we are studying the topics of mindfulness or just well-being and positive psychology, one thing we have been told is that music is something that people could utilize to calm themselves down, to put themselves in a better
Yeah.
mental state.
Hmm.
So, what is your opinion on that?
I mean,
So we are in a time where now
yeah.
more ready access to music than ever before. So, how do you think we can utilize it? Do you even think we can?
We are already utilizing it, no? Right? Like everyone has a earphone right now, right? I mean, we consume more music than before. Like past generations, they used to have. I remember when I was a kid, uh, I felt lucky that I got my own cassette player and couple of cassettes. They used to be pretty expensive. Okay, and I had few cassettes. So I used to repeat that before sleeping, while I was studying for ITJ or something. And then came the computer, and then I could have my library, like iTunes library in computer, right? So, and then suddenly the library grew. Then people had the iPods, right? And then you could get like in 500 rupees, you can get like a 4 GB iPod at some point. So, and now we have almost unlimited access, right? With Spotify or other things, right? So we are consuming more and more music. People are making more and more music now, right? Because we all have access, we can actually put it, record it, and things like that. Uh, but at the same time, I think we need to consume. I personally think that probably we need to go down consuming music because when we get into a habit of always listening to music, it's basically numbs our thoughts. We are not thinking. We're not talking to ourselves. We're not talking about the world in our brain. We are listening to music. It's a. So I personally avoid music as much as I can until I really need it. But if you can come up with something, if you can think about the music scientifically, right? So, for instance, you see these videos on internet on you know natural sounds, for instance, for sleeping, and there's a whole category of music or sounds called ASMR, right? And now we have ASMR artists with millions of views, and they're making a lot of money, which makes people basically go into sleep and things like that. But those are based on some principles of sensory motor neuroscience, right? Like certain patterns actually calm us down. Certain patterns actually, are obnoxious to the ears. So if you actually attack music scientifically and think about it scientifically, then there's a lot of scope and innovation, right? For music therapy, for instance, in certain disease, like for instance, in last talk, Professor Last talked about his new device for Alzheimer, right? Likewise, I have a session with Professor Benoit Bardi from France, who has music therapy for people with Parkinson's. So, so yeah, so there's a lot of scope, but at the same time, it's not a place where, I mean, we have good musicians, right? And we all want to listen to the best musician, basically, right? Right. So when it comes to tabla, we listen to, the best tabla player. We listen to the best sitar player, right? We listen to A.R. Rahman for certain things. So it's hard to think of it as a career for me because it's you know what I mean. It's like it's a place where celebrity thing comes in. It's not a place for everyone as a uh, as a career.
And coming back to one of the things that you had mentioned before about uh, broadening our fields as much as possible for undergraduate students. And there's also the notion that hyper specialization is the way in the future to have a stable career. So, out of the two, which do you think is going to be a more mainstream option that people choose? Hyper specializing in a very small niche or just broadening their subject field as much as possible?
Okay, so let's take a step behind and understand what AI is. Okay, like so I want you to think of AI more like a trampoline, right? So if it's a trampoline, and if you go into that trampoline, you will jump based on how far you jump, right? So you basically move in certain ways, and then trampoline will help you in move in certain other ways, right? And you can amplify your movements, right? But ultimately, the direction at which you hit the trampoline, how you hit the trampoline, which matter, right? And that's why not everyone is good with trampoline. Some of us are bad at trampoline, some of us are good with trampoline. Likewise, there is a net where you throw something and it gives you some output, right? You can actually become a really, really good user of AI, right? Because AI is learning with you, right? And you are interacting with that. So that's the first thing you should keep in mind, when it comes to using the AI. Now, when it comes to generalization, so basically use the AI as a super tool you have now for n number of things. Now, thinking about generalization versus specialization. So I personally think that a lot of being generalist versus being specialist is a personality thing. Some people just like to dig deeper into some things, right? Like really, really deep into something. You need some kind of obsession for that, right? And of course, there will be very few people like that. It takes a lot of time to develop that level of expertise, right? Like tens and tens of years. The confusion happens because I think for a long time we thought that some people are experts on something when actually they were not. Okay. So, so, so for instance, some people we thought were experts in writing affidavits, and we used to go them to get affidavits, right? But an AI can write an affidavit in like 5 seconds. So we thought that writing an affidavit or writing, these bureaucratic documents is basically an expertise. Probably it was not an expertise to begin with, right? But actually think of a problem and think of, for instance, building a business is an expertise, right? Some people start new businesses and all the businesses succeed, right? So they probably understand a lot of things and they are expert in that whole field or expert in that n number of things. Likewise, some people are very expert at engineers, right? Who design bridges, for instance, or things like that, right? Or get it constructed, civil engineers. So let's first of all we need to clarify that confusion. Where is our expertise? So most of the people we thought specialized were actually not specialized. The second thing is that generalist is a generally a better idea for everyone because very few of us are actually. So if you think about yourself, think about all your aunts and uncles and brothers and elder siblings and number of people. Make a list of 50. Do it for yourself. Make a list of 50 people you know. Okay. Then write what you think, whether they are hyper specialists on certain thing, where there are very few people like them, or they are specialists, or they are generalists, or they are just nothing. I mean, they just do something which will be replaceable, or which already is replaced, or they're doing it out of necessity, or something of that nature, right? And you yourself see the distribution of that, right? How many people are hyper specialized, in your life? It will be like you can count on your fingers, right? Probably some surgeons, some doctors, certain lawyers for certain high profile cases. Most of the people are actually not hyper specialized in our society in general, right? So, uh, but they are like they have a little bit of specialization or like generality that needs to be broadened. So now those same people need to be even more general. First, because we might not have stable careers in the future where you get a job and you keep that job forever, right? Because the nature of things are changing so fast, even governments will decide that we want to have like temporary people, we want to bring in experts for like 5 years, 10 years, and things like that. There might not be any, career where you go to a job and you do the same job for 20 years. It was never the case if you go to the past, right? I mean, our before our parents' generation, there was no careers like that, right? People used to come up with new things. They used to have a land, they used to grow one crop, and then second crop, if something happened, they'll grow third crop, and they will grow some woods, and they will hunt, right? So this one career has been a very recent thing, and probably we are going back now in a very advanced society where we will again have less of those long-term careers, which means that we need to be generalist as well as we should be able to be open to the thought that we need to keep learning, right? So that we can anytime switch things, right? So that's some of my
I
thoughts
think
on
that
that.
is a very, very dynamic view to looking at career prospects because rather than specializing and assuming that this is something that I'm going to be doing throughout my career,
Yeah.
I already live under the assumption that yes, maybe this is not something that I'm going to be doing and I need to be on this continuous growth process.
And also, I mean, you're right about that. Also, we are very much conditioned to think of success as being able to hold on to that pillar of, one job, right? That we have defined success like that, right? So we think of everyone else who keeps moving or keeps trying new things or fails, 5 times in their lives as unsuccessful as a culture, right? So we need to embrace the fact that success is not, getting hold of one good job and keep it forever. Maybe success is how easily you can go from one job to the other of a kind and how much you can learn and actually, evolve and create new things. I think we need to think, because ultimately we are motivated by the fact of success, right? Like, I want to be successful. I think we need to
Yeah.
work on our definitions of successful, right?
Yeah.
Which means you want to make money no matter how you want to make, no matter how you make, right? If you have to sell vada pav, you sell vada pav, and if you have to code at night, you code at night, right? Ultimately, you need to create resources for you, and they both are good options to create resources, right? Because people need vada pav, right? As much as they need coding. So there's nothing less about selling vada pav than selling code. You're ultimately selling something to someone, right? So that's first
Yeah.
thing. The second thing is that you have to uh, uh, in both process learn, right? You have to differentiate your vada pav and you have to differentiate your code. So if you're open to those two things, you work for money, which is your family, your sustenance, and you work for your passion simultaneously, where you improve things. So you can actually have a passionate vada pav wala, right, or a passionate vada pav than a non-passionate vada pav. And you yourself know the difference, right? We go to certain places in Pune to eat vada pav because those people are passionate for vada pav, right?
It's
And
12 o'clock.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I guess we are moving back to the survival issue where we are looking at survival of the fittest, and here it will be survival of the smartest or survival of the most well adjusted. So
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
yes, go ahead, Deepika.
It was a really fresh perspective to think about not specializing and going for broadening your field as much as possible. Another thing that a lot of us have been interested in has been research, and you have a lot of research experience in a lot of different fields. So, we would like to know more about how the field of research is right now for psychology students as well as for other fields.
Okay, so that's a very complex question, and I will be honest with you in that, right? Okay, I'll not create a lovely picture there. So there are two things. One, somebody interested in research and somebody getting successful with research are two different things, right? And there's a very high rate of failure in research, okay? In several ways. Everyone who wants to go into research wants to continue in research because they're passionate about it most of the time. A very few people of them are able to actually carry on long term, right? They get a position or they get the resources to carry on the kind of research they want to do. There are very high rate of dropout, for a number of reasons. And a lot of things matter. So your family's financial status, right? Like how much resources your parents right now have, also has a lot of bearing on your research success, right? Because research is not a field in which you get paid a lot, right? And there's a very high rate of failure, right? You might not actually ever have a lucrative career, once you drop out from research, right? And you lose a lot of time of your youth, of your prime years, right? You might be late to marry, you might be late to have kids, you might be late to n number of things, right? So there's a lot of sacrifice involved. So you always have to bear that responsibility that do I right now need to work for money, or do I have actually the luxury to actually go into research, right? And be pragmatic about it, because there's no point to be a casualty in the process, right? So be very pragmatic about it, and it's all about being pragmatic. So that's one thing. Second thing is that research can be coercive. So not every lab is good, not every professor is good, not every institute is good, as well as everyone is working on a different pressure. So I have my own pressures on me to get funding, right? Professors have their own pressure, institutes have their own pressure, and all these systems are working for their own, benefits or for their own advancement. So you have to be really lucky to fit in a place where your ambitions and the ambitions of your professor or the ambitions of your, institute match together, right? Until you have an intuition that that is actually falling together, I would not recommend going into research. Okay. What you should do is try out different opportunities for research, right? So try out summer internship with professors in labs. Also, if you, I don't know about India, but at least in the US and other countries, uh, universities don't spend as much on research as private companies do now. So, for instance, any company, you look at Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, OpenAI, all of these publish papers and do research, and they spend much, much more money than universities do or research institutes do. Every company, like who makes medical instruments, like GE, Philips, they all do very cutting edge research, right? Okay, every damn instrument, you go to a hospital, right? There are amazing instruments in the hospital, especially when you go for imaging or, you're going for, blood test, all these assays. They are all biomedical companies, right, in Bangalore and other places. And they do cutting edge research. That's why they're able to give you something, so efficient and so cheap and so specific, like biomarkers. So, and to go into that, you do not need to have a PhD. You can actually have a specific expertise in, like, for instance, signal processing, and you work in like an fMRI company who actually makes fMRIs, or a biomedical company who makes biomedical instruments. So we never think about that, but those are very valid and very, decent, well-paying ways to be a researcher. Okay, so that's there. But the other thing is that just experiment. So, for instance, I never planned to be a scientist. I wanted to be academic and, keep trying things. But with me, I was lucky to have met Professor Sutit Dey at IISER Pune and Deepak Barua, who I worked with. Okay, so that I could actually graduate. Otherwise, I don't know what would happen to me. Then I was lucky to find Professor Meva Singh in Mysore. Okay, who is amazing. And then I was lucky to get like Professor Dori Fregesi, and then I was lucky to have, later mentors. And not everyone is lucky like that. That's first thing. And second thing is I never look for institutions. I never look for university ranking. I never look for professors ranking. I never looked for, how much money they pay me. I graduated from IISER. People were going high paid jobs. All my colleagues in IITs were getting, 20, 30 lakhs packages. And I took a job with Professor Meva Singh and I worked with him for 2 years. I used to get 8,000 rupees a month, right? And I used to live in a place called there's a studio in Mysore called Premier Studio, where Tipu Sultan used to be shot in 90s, and it got fire, and then it became a haunted house. So because it was haunted house, the rooms were very cheap there, and they didn't used to charge, advance and all these things. So I rented a room in a haunted house, and I lived there for a year and a half while I was working on monkeys in the forests. So it took some sacrifice, right? So so I never cared for all those things, and I was lucky that it worked out. Had it not worked out, I would have not been talking to you now, right? And the theory would have been different. So experiment and see what it works for you. And just make sure that you have money to survive or somebody can support you. And you also have a sure shot way to come out of it if you think that it's not working for you.
So we have spoken a lot about AI in this interview. Now, one thing that we all think when you come to AI is how ethical is it?
So
Because there's a lot of gray area when it
what's
comes
unethical
as
about it?
to, sorry?
What is unethical about it?
So one thing we are told a lot, at least in this stage, is that we have to be very sure about our references and we have to credit people where we're getting the information from.
Hmm.
And one thing about AI is that it takes a lot of information from all over the internet. And we may not be getting the right sources for it because even if you ask, say,
Yeah.
ChatGPT to create like a essay for you,
So you
and
should
you
not
ask
use
it
it. So
for
you should
references.
so one thing is that these softwares make up references, right? First of all, and there have been people who published articles with made up references. So be very careful, right? Don't use AI for those kind of things, right? Use it more for learning. I mean, I don't think you should or anyone should ask AI to write things for you, like the whole papers or, put references and these kind of things. You need to be able to know the literature, right? So if you are using any AI software for references, I mean, you should open that paper and read. I mean, the very fact that somebody is citing a paper which they have not gone through and read, the paper means that they're just citing it, right? They're citing it without knowing what's inside that article. So, so don't cut corners there, first of all. If you don't cut corners, there's nothing unethical there, right? The second thing is that in terms of citing, right? If you ask, I mean, think of AI as your professor. When you ask your professor something and then you write about it, do you always ask professor, who should I cite? You cite when the citation is needed, right? Just like AI, right? So when you think that this is a fact which somebody would have come up with lately, especially about very specific about research, you go and search, what kind of reference you need for that claim, or that claim is accurate or not. But for very general information, you don't need citations. It's no more different than asking somebody who is more knowledgeable than you. So see, at the end of the day, there are two kind of people. Okay, one who are doers and one who are talkers, right? Okay. So a lot of debates about ethics end up being by people who don't do things, who actually talk about things, right? And generally, I give more credibility and follow people who actually do things, right? So there is a lot of criticism, but do you think that's coming back? Do you not want to use, right? So the question you have to ask yourself, right? If like what is unethical about it, and if it is unethical, do you not want to use, right? One can say that it is actually taking copyrights. A lot of people created this stuff, and it is learning based on that, and that's why it's stealing stuff, right? But if you go to a museum and watch n number of paintings and draw an inspiration from all those paintings and draw a painting of yourself, even you have stolen ideas, right? Right. So how is that different than AI learning on things? So I personally am yet to see a strong evidence of, a breach of ethics. But then maybe I'm not aware of.
We would also like to know more about the specific research that you have done. So, like you talked about experimenting with monkeys, and you've also done a lot of work with biomarkers. So, we would like to know more about your research.
Okay, so I'll give you a little about what we are trying to do now or what the current inspiration is. So we know our society is aging, right? In general, we all are aging as a society. We will have much more older people than young people later. And we want to improve our overall lifespan, right? We want to live more healthy over time. One of the side effects of living longer is that you get diseases, right? And some things are not very specific to disease. It's like you don't have a disease, but you deteriorate in the quality of your body, of your brain, and just the overall decline in quality, right? So, for instance, older people fall more often, right? They get tired more often. They get injuries more often for a number of things, a number of reasons because of sarcopenia, which is like basically loss of muscle mass, loss of neurons in the brain, and they get Parkinson's, they get Alzheimer. So right now, I'm getting interested in coming up with solutions to improve general ability to move and to reduce cognitive decline with things that do not take a lot of money. So there are a lot of fancy solutions. If it takes a lot of money, not every one of us can afford it, right? We want something which is both cheap, accessible, and it is part of your everyday life, which can improve those kind of things. So recently we have discovered that you can create these boards with different kind of instabilities. They're called balance boards that are available on Amazon for 1,000, 2,000 rupees. But uh, but we don't understand the principles of how we work. So one of the major project in the lab is to understand what exactly those boards do in terms of your brain, in terms of how the brain processes that, how muscles react to that, and how your whole body reacts to that. So we bring people in the lab. We ask them to do different kind of stuff on those boards. We have designed different kind of boards with different properties. So we do 3D printing. Uh, so we design a 3D print based on certain principles. Then we test those on different kind of people. So we test it based, on young people, on old people, middle-aged people, people with, ankle instabilities, people with knee arthritis, people with hip problems. And we want to create different kind of boards by understanding how they work for different things. So for instance, if you have a hip surgery is very common among older people, right? So if you have a hip surgery, afterwards people start walking differently. Can we actually use these low cost instruments to improve the symmetry they have? So if one side gets, a hip replacement, they have change in gait, right? Where they move a little differently on one side. Can we bring it back, right? Can we identify what's the problem and bring it back? Can we create these exercises for people with knee arthritis? So, for instance, if you have knee arthritis, people generally stop walking much, right? Because their knees pain. Because of that, their hip movements also reduce and their ankle movements also reduce, right? Which is basically an unnecessary reduction and body becomes stiffer and stiffer and they start falling. So, we want to create something which they can use for exercise, which doesn't impact their knee as much, but at the same time, their ankle and hip is actually engaged, right? Likewise, we can think of somebody who is falling again and again, and you think they might be falling because of some problem in the leg, but it might be back pain because when they have back pain and they actually have some kind of perturbation, they are not able to respond properly from their with their upper body, right? So can we target their back, using these kind of things? So that's one of the project. Uh, but the techniques which go into that, we have huge labs where we have motion tracking systems, we have EMG systems to record from muscles, we can record from forces. We look at their eyes, so we track their eyes. So we also plan to record from the brains while they're doing that. And then we use very sophisticated algorithms to process those and to make maps out of those. And we basically use physics to understand the whole body and how it interacts with that. And that's basically one of the major themes in the lab. And then you have a lot of interest about. So one of the major questions which I'm interested in personally is, if you think about a brain as a psychology student, right? I don't know how many of you have dissected a brain or seen a brain actually in reality. It is like cheese. Okay, it really looks like cheese. It feels like cheese when you touch it. So the question is that, and if you put in a grinder, it becomes like a milkshake, right? Because if you look at the protein, fat, and carbohydrate composition of your brain, and if you go and get an avocado smoothie, probably fat content is the same, right? So, something which resembles like a smoothie is basically creating the whole world, right? We know how powerful the brain is and how intelligent it is. So the question is that how can a milkshake? What exactly is the property of a milkshake? Fats, proteins, and carbohydrates that can make it so powerful. So far we have been thinking of brain as a computer, which I don't think is a good idea because computers work on very different principles. So we are trying to come up with new ways to understand the brain and to think about the brain, which is not to think of it as a computer, but think of it as a fluid, as a cheese. But what is exactly that cheese doing to be able to, coordinate the body, to interact with the world, to speak, and things like that. So that's more on the academic side of things.
So those are the questions from our side. If any of the students sitting in the department have any questions to ask Sir, you can find Miss Vaijanti outside the department. And for Sir, do you have anything that we have not covered that you would like to address or that you would like to tell us?
Uh, Not necessarily. I mean, keep exploring. Pune is an amazing place. I was in Pune last year as well. Whenever I get a chance, I go to Pune. Uh, and keep exploring. And Pune has so many institutes, so much going on. So just be as social as you can be, and interact with people. There's so many labs. Just figure out people to work and don't limit yourself to psychology, right? Even if you're a psychology, go work with a biologist, go work with a physicist, learn yourself, any different topics. And now we have so many podcasts, so you can listen to experts from every field. Just enjoy our time.
I think that was a fabulous interaction because we jumped between a lot of topics, right from the skills which undergraduates must try to hone and must possess, and your research, your past, and also advanced biomechanics and biomarkers. And I don't think we're ever going to look at the avocado milkshake the same way that
Or I would rather like you to not look at the brain the same way.
right. That's a very interesting way because we speak a lot about paradigms of cognitive psychology and we speak about multiple paradigms in
Yeah.
information processing paradigm, the ecological paradigm, the evolutionary perspective, right? So we somehow have to force ourselves to look at certain, for example, models of memory.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the information processing approach, there's like there's a sensory memory, there's a working memory, there's a short-term memory, there's a long-term memory.
So the question is, when does short-term memory actually becomes a long-term memory? Can anyone tell me?
Yeah, yeah. So what sort of like initiates that process? So I guess you're looking deeper into that
Or
question
or
as
or
to
or is it actually two different memories? Like have we just come up with these terms like short term, long term? I mean, intuitively, yes, something is short term, long term. But for brain, I mean, does it really matter what is short term or what is long term? Or
yeah.
when does it the brain thinks like, okay, now it's short term and now let me convert it to long term? Or is it more like what is needed for survival and what is not? Uh, the question is like, does brain divide things the way we divide things, when we speak?
Yeah, that's an interesting way because when we look at paradigms of cognitive psychology or the lens or the tool which you're using to look
Yeah.
at the subject matter, for example, memory that we're discussing here,
Yeah.
we are creating limitations of how we are looking at, let's say, the phenomenon, the cognitive function of memory. By
Right.
giving terms like short-term memory, sensory memory, long-term memory, we are creating the bifurcation. What exactly happens in the brain is probably not very well
Right,
known.
right, right, right. So for instance, you go out somewhere, in the morning and you come back in the evening. 2 days later, you don't remember anything that happened that day, right? Like if I ask you what happened on January 13th, from morning to evening, you don't remember, right? Right? But if something critical suddenly happened at evening 5, let's say something, you saw something funny, or there was a tragedy, suddenly you will remember the whole day, right? So from morning to evening, had nothing happened in the evening, you would have not remembered anything before that. But just because that event would happen at that moment, you will end up remembering everything before that, right? So, so do you want to say, like, is it okay to say that that event converted everything before that, which was in the short-term memory, into the long-term memory? I mean, you see the confusion which comes when we come up with these terminologies, because the
It's
brain
true.
was working exactly the same way till that evening when that event happened.
Yeah.
Or is that event an episodic memory? I don't know, so I don't use those terms.
Right. Right. If the students had another question, like to probably speak a little bit about the research that you started off your career with. So, how did you
Okay,
work with?
so that's a funny story. So as I told you, I was a character when I was at ICER, and probably a lot of people still know me for that reason. And so when I was at ICER, I was always working in some lab, always doing research. But until my master's, I was doing not so dangerous research, right? I was doing in some lab, working on something worked, something did not work, break things apart. Then I went to Professor Meva Singh and worked on monkeys on a project, and then I came back. So I had to do my thesis on Pune, but I wanted to work on animals. So I started my thesis on stray dogs in Pune. Now Pune has a lot of stray dogs, right? They come out at night when everyone sleeps. So I thought of a project, and that was a weird, and I hated instruction, so I wanted to do it alone. I didn't want any professor to interfere. So I came up with this project, and then the project involved I used to bring these packets and make these packets of with a chicken claw. So I used to go to these chicken shops, and they have these leftover chicken legs. I would buy them, and then I create these packets of different kind, which could be opened in different ways, only few ways. And then I'll give it to different dogs in different times. And then one of the part involved where I wanted to see dogs who are more afraid or less afraid, like more bold and uh, you know kind of dogs are better at opening or innovating. So one of the ways to open that packet was more innovative, and one of us was like you just rip it apart. So I bought like a big remote controlled car. It was like huge car. So I would keep the packet, and the dog will smell it, and the dog will start coming from like 100 meters. And while the dog was at like certain distance, the remote control car will start approaching the dog, and the car had a lot of lights, for instance. And then when the dog will be afraid of that car, I'll measure that distance. And what we found was that the more afraid the dogs are, the less innovative they were. So the dogs who were less afraid, who basically persisted, uh, used they stick to the task and actually opened it the best possible way, even though it took longer time compared to those who were actually afraid. Those who are afraid, they'll just take the packet and rip it apart, okay, or they will go and hide somewhere. And then we also discovered that among female dogs were ripping it apart. But when the female dogs are pregnant, that's when they will open it in the innovative way. Okay. And we also found that when they were pregnant, they were less afraid. So we had a theory that how hormones kind of play a role in innovation and things like that. So that was out of my little knowledge, because I just changed fields and I just started reading about biology and things like that. But the funny thing is that I was next to ICER in Pashan, and I was doing this experiment. There was a guy who saw me, and just before few years, there was a bomb blast in German bakery in Pune. Okay, a very infamous bomb blast a few years back. So this guy came and he said that you are a terrorist, and he asked me for my ID. So I showed him my ID. I had a ICER Pune ID. So they argued that even terrorists carry ID. So this means that you're a terrorist because you're having a fake ID. I told him I study in this institute, blah blah blah. But he didn't. Then he called other people. And they called police. Okay. So police came. They asked me like, what are you doing with all this remote controlled car? So then they said, no, 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 this can be dangerous. What if there's a bomb in this car and everything? So they brought another guy on a bike and they took me to the Pashan police station, okay, at night. Okay. So I called my director. So the registrar of the institute came, one of my other professors came, they all came. And I was sitting there, they were chatting basically. And in half an hour, they basically were playing with the car. All the police was playing with the car because the car was very fancy and the battery was dead by then. But all the professors came, and then finally, they told like, oh yeah, he's our student and he was working, and everything happened. And then finally, I had a friend whose father was in the police department. So then next day I went there and actually got a letter from, the police department, permission basically, so that nobody disturbs me. But I had a friend who used to run a Facebook channel called Fake News at ISER Pune, in which he will normally put like real news, but sometimes he'll put some fake news. And because it was real news, people will consider that also as like real stuff. Okay, so then there was a whole story on how ISER Pune was harboring a terrorist and he was caught, and all this event happened at night and things like that. So that was my PhD. This was my master's thesis, by the way, which finally turned into two publications, one in animal behavior and one in behavior. So that was my first piece of research, which was more of a fun project and had a lot of comedy as I completed project.
I think we have more takeaways by these informal, interaction than we would have by formal framed questions. Because I think one thing that at least I've taken away, is that it takes a lot of openness to experience, to be in a field like, like yours, to explore the way that you do. Like, I think you should have less inhibition, less fear, for you to actually like ignite that
I think there are
passion.
both kind of people, like there are very formal kind of academicians and there are informal kind of academicians. I tend to be informal one, but I think there are more. And don't mistake informalness with attitude and general practice with informality in work, right? So like I'm extremely professional and formal with the work where when it is actually needed. So there's a distinction between those.
Yeah, what I meant to say was
Yeah.
our informal interaction brought about more
Of
intimacy.
course. Yeah.
Like the kind of demeanor, the kind of
Yeah.
skills, the kind of
Yeah.
outlook you need to have to be professional. So,
Yeah. Else you would have asked AI, right? How to be a researcher.
right, right. I think it was absolutely fascinating, conversation. I really like the way you answered the students' questions. Maybe we'll just leave a minute. If students sitting in the classroom would like to shoot a
Sure.
question. Akshata, can you just moderate that, please? If someone wants to ask a question, you can just unmute and then ask.
Can't hear you.
Revati, why don't you go to the staff room and probably speak from that computer? Yes, in the staff room. We'll just take a minute.
Hmm.
So my question was, you told us how you are exploring in your lab that the brain is maybe not like a computer, but like a piece of cheese. So would you expand a little more on that idea?
Okay, so when you're talking about a computer, it's a semiconductor, right? It has a structure. It has a physical structure, and that physical structure determines, it's fixed for physical structure. And then you have a software, right? You can run multiple different softwares on the same processor, right? So there's a distinction between what is software and what is hardware, right? That's not the case with the brain, right? If you think about your brain is changing continuously. Like every time you listen, I mean, you're listening to this talk, right? You're listening to me speaking, your brain is not the same as before now, right? Like there is stuff happening all over the brain. So in the brain, there's no distinction between software and hardware. That's first thing. The second thing is that brain is a fluid, right? The fluid properties change. So your brain, there's nothing solid in the brain, right? Everything is fluid at a certain level, and basically everything is in a fluidic state in terms of change. So for instance, each neuron has like hundreds of dendrites, right? Axonal connections and dendrites. And number of those connections also keep changing over time, right? They keep decaying as we age, right? But we still remain the same, right? The width of those change, and we know that the axonal width basically determines, how fast, for instance, an action potential travels through that. So even the timing of action potential through every of those neurons is changing, every moment to moment, right? So you look at any property of a neuron, every property of non-neuronal cells, which we are now discovering their role in thinking, each of those properties are changing, right? So I'll give you a simple example. So for my father had fourth stage cancer. He was having a tumor in his head, in the frontal cortex, and we admitted to the hospital because of some surgery, and he went into coma, right? Now he had a tumor on his left frontal cortex, and because of that frontal cortex, he had like edema, which is basically swelling in his left brain. So some doctors thought that he has swelling because of the tumor, and that's why he's in coma. And they prescribed brain surgery, and there was about 10% chance that he will come back from the surgery. Uh, so there were a lot of doctors who were perplexed. There was a huge team of doctors, and one of the doctors then thought that probably that is not because of the tumor. Just because there's a tumor, we are thinking that this is because of tumor, but there might be other reason. They did all the blood tests, and they couldn't figure out anything. So finally, there's a test of ammonia, your blood ammonia, which is a very unusual test. Normally, you don't do because the blood ammonia levels don't fluctuate much. It turns up that his liver had some issue, which was not clear in his, liver images, because of which the body was not able to filter ammonia. So his blood ammonia level was higher, and because of that blood ammonia, there was toxicity happening in the brain, and brain basically he was in coma, right? Now we do not yet have any models of the brain where a simple one chemical in your blood can actually take you to coma, right? That doesn't happen in computer. You put your microprocessor in like another gas chamber or another, in some liquid, it still works, right? So your simple metabolites can completely change your brain physiology, right? Your computational principles don't cannot address those. I mean, one can promise that we'll learn something it will address. So starting from the level of single neuron to action potential to the level of whole metabolism, at none of the levels a computer can actually explain. But when you are talking about a fluid, right? Uh, if you assume that it's a fluid and what exactly is changing in that fluid which makes it work in a certain way, then you are more pragmatic about the material properties of the brain, and then you apply tools from not from computer science, but from, for instance, fluid mechanics, because there's a whole field of fluid mechanics, and though you apply those tools to understand the brain compared to computational tools, right? So I'm not saying that you cannot compute. We all can do 2 plus 2 like computers do, right? The question is that whether that 2 plus 2, when it happens inside the brain, does it happen the same way whether the way a computer does, right? The modern computer does. So there's a difference between computing versus working as a computer, right? That's a dichotomy. That's what I meant when I said that brain is more like a milkshake than actually it is like a semiconductor.
Yeah, I think that was a very, very dynamic sort of an answer, and I like the way you gave the perspective of how, how different it is and not how similar it is.
Exactly.
It does similar things, but doesn't mean it's the same mechanics that the brain is using.
Exactly.
Yeah. I
I
think we
mean,
can, yeah, please go ahead.
I once talked to a professor. He basically made fun of, this idea. So he says like, brain has a superior olive, so we can call it a martini. So, but that's not the way to think, because martinis have olives, right? So, so that's a different way to draw an analogy. When you draw an analogy, that analogy also has to be, or you use a metaphor, that also has to have a certain, rationale to it, right? We can call a brain a mushroom if it just looks like a mushroom, but it's not, right? Or a coral, sea coral, but it's not. By the way, on that topic, we are soon having a book coming. It will be coming in like a few months, which talks about different ways to think about the brain.
Oh, that'll be fascinating. If you could just
Yeah.
share a little more about the upcoming book.
Yeah, so it's called Beyond the Computer Metaphor of Mind and Brain, and it's not written by me alone. There are 15 teams, and they all have described what are the limitations of thinking of or viewing brain as a computer. Where does that computational metaphor kind of limits, and what are some of the new ways to think about how the brain and behavior works, and what new can we do by adapting those kind of ideas. So it's in press right now with Cambridge University Press. It will be coming in a few months.
Oh, that'll be wonderful. Congratulations on the
Yeah.
book publication. We are also looking forward to and reading and probably sharing with our students.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. I would like to just take this opportunity to thank Dr. Madhur for sparing the time and so willingly ready to interact with our students from the Department of Psychology, Fergusson College. I really would like to extend my heartfelt thank you to you, Dr. Madhur. I hand over the session to Mukta to conclude the session and give the vote of thanks formally.
It was my pleasure.
I'm very much privileged to extend the warm gratitude on behalf of all of us. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Mangalam for taking the time to guide us with such valuable insights. Your expertise truly inspired us to think critically. A big thank you to Industry Readiness Cell, Vaijanti ma'am, and all the IRC members for arranging this session. To my fellow attendees, thank you for your information, enthusiastic participation, and thoughtful questions, which made the sessions more interactive and engaging. With this, I would like to bring today's session to a close. Thank you and have a nice day.
Bye.